Imagine this. You are standing at the edge of a vast ocean, the waves whispering secrets that only you can hear. The horizon stretches endlessly, dissolving into a haze where sky and sea become one. There is something hypnotic about the way the water moves, an eternal ebb and flow, an endless giving and taking. And in this moment, you realize something unsettling. The ocean, in all its depth and grandeur, is both a sanctuary and a grave. It cradles the lost. It erodes the strongest stones. It swallows entire ships without a sound. It gives life, yet it is merciless in its indifference. Now ask yourself, what does it mean to be someone who feels like this ocean? What does it mean to carry within you a depth so vast that it terrifies even you? What does it mean to be born under a sign that absorbs everything, every sorrow, every joy, every unspoken grief of the world, only to dissolve into silence? This is the burden of Pisces, the last sign of the Zodiac, the one who has lived through all the others. There is a tragic wisdom in those born under this sign, an ancient knowing that is both a gift and a curse. They move through life like dreamers trapped between worlds, too sensitive for the brutality of reality, yet too wise to be fully consumed by illusion. They see the hidden wounds in others, feel the suffering that others ignore, and carry the weight of emotions that do not belong to them. And yet, in their own pain, they are often invisible. You have met them before, the quiet ones who seem lost in thought, the souls who love too deeply, the ones who give endlessly until there is nothing left. They are the friends who understand your sadness before you speak, the lovers who vanish into their own loneliness, the artists who paint beauty from sorrow. They are the healers who never heal themselves. And despite their kindness, their boundless love, the world often mistakes their depth for weakness. But here lies the paradox. How can someone so intuitive, so wise, be so prone to suffering? How can a soul that understands the nature of existence so intimately still fall into the same traps of heartbreak, self-sacrifice, and despair? If wisdom brings freedom, why does Pisces remain shackled to their own wounds? This is the great question, the haunting contradiction at the heart of their existence. Perhaps it is because knowledge alone does not save us. Perhaps it is because to see everything clearly, human frailty, impermanence, the inevitability of loss, is to live in a state of quiet mourning. Or perhaps the tragedy of Pisces is not in their suffering, but in their refusal to turn away from it. While others build walls, they remain open. While others numb themselves, they feel everything. So what happens when the weight of the world becomes too much? When the ocean of their soul becomes a storm they can no longer control? When their empathy becomes their prison? And more importantly, is there a way out? To answer this, we must go deeper. We must uncover the hidden forces that shape this tragedy, the psychological and philosophical roots of a suffering so profound that it is mistaken for fate. To understand the sorrow of Pisces, we must first understand the nature of sorrow itself. Is suffering a flaw, or is it proof of something deeper? Perhaps an awareness that most people spend their lives avoiding. The world teaches us to categorize pain as a problem to be solved, an error to be corrected. But what if sorrow is not an accident? What if, for some, it is an inescapable aspect of being? Carl Jung spoke of the wounded healer, the idea that those who suffer the most are often the ones who become the most compassionate. Pisces embodies this archetype, not by choice, but by nature. Their pain is not merely personal, it is existential. It is the agony of seeing beyond the illusions that keep others comfortable. They recognize the masks people wear, the quiet desperation in their laughter, the longing hidden behind their words. And in knowing too much, they often feel powerless to change anything. Schopenhauer would argue that the Pisces soul is doomed to suffering because they are too attuned to the will of life, the endless striving, the ceaseless cycle of desire and disappointment. To feel deeply is to be wounded constantly. To love unconditionally is to invite heartbreak. And yet, despite knowing this, Pisces continues to love, to feel, to drown in the emotions of a world that does not reciprocate their depth. Why? Because they cannot help it. Pisces, ruled by Neptune, lives in a world of blurred boundaries. They do not simply observe pain, they absorb it. They do not witness suffering from a distance, they become it. Sartre's existentialism suggests that human beings are condemned to be free, forced to create meaning in a world that offers none. But for Pisces, this burden is doubled. Not only must they find their own meaning, but they must also carry the discarded pain of those who refuse to confront their own shadows. They feel the weight of unspoken grief, the quiet sadness in a stranger's eyes, the hidden turmoil beneath a lover's silence. And what makes this burden unbearable is that the world does not acknowledge it. Their suffering is often invisible, dismissed as oversensitivity, as if feeling too much is a character flaw rather than an insight into reality itself. Pisces' tragedy is not that they suffer, it is that they suffer alone. Aldous Huxley once warned that the more perceptive a person is, the harder it is for them to function in a society built on illusion. Pisces exists in this liminal space, half in the world, half beyond it, forever feeling like a stranger even among those they love. Their empathy makes them healers, but it also makes them vulnerable. They give endlessly, hoping that someone someday will understand them the way they understand others. And yet, how often do they find themselves drained, depleted, questioning if anyone truly sees them? But what if this suffering is not an inescapable fate? What if the true tragedy of Pisces is not their pain, but their belief that they must carry it alone? Because hidden beneath this sorrow, beneath this unbearable depth, there is something waiting, something that can change everything. But to find it, but what happens when sorrow is not just a personal burden, but a force that silently shapes everything? Identity, relationships, and even the world itself. Pisces' suffering does not exist in a vacuum. It seeps into their choices, their self-perception, the way they move through life. The weight of feeling too much has consequences, some visible, some invisible, but all deeply ingrained. And the most dangerous of these is the slow erosion of the self. To live as Pisces is to live in a constant state of permeability. The boundaries between self and other blur until the distinction becomes meaningless. It starts subtly, absorbing a friend's sadness, taking on the weight of a lover's unspoken pain, mirroring the energy of the room. Over time, it becomes second nature, an unconscious survival mechanism. To be everything for everyone and nothing for oneself. The paradox is devastating. In their effort to heal, to comfort, to understand, Pisces can lose themselves entirely. They become a vessel for the emotions of others, pouring themselves out until there is nothing left. And yet, when they look around for someone to fill them in return, they find only absence, because they have spent so long dissolving into others that no one knows how to reach them anymore. And here is where the tragedy deepens. The world rewards those who build walls, not those who tear them down. Society praises strength, but defines it in terms of detachment. Resilience is mistaken for emotional distance. Wisdom is mistaken for cold calculation. Pisces, in their raw openness, become anomalies. Their suffering is dismissed as self-inflicted, their kindness mistaken for naivety. People take from them without realizing they are taking. People wound them without realizing they are bleeding. This is not merely a personal affliction, it is a societal one. The world benefits from those who feel deeply but does not protect them. The artist who transforms pain into beauty is admired, but their suffering is romanticized rather than alleviated. The healer who absorbs the suffering of others is valued, but their own pain is overlooked. The lover who gives endlessly is cherished, but rarely in the way they truly need. And in the silence of their own exhaustion, a realization creeps in, a dangerous, suffocating thought. Maybe I am not meant to be understood. This thought is the slow poison that erodes the soul. It makes Pisces retreat further into themselves, becoming ghosts in their own lives. They disappear into their dreams, into the worlds they create in their minds, into their art, their music, their poetry. They seek escape, not because they are weak, but because the real world is too sharp, too cruel, too indifferent to what they carry inside them. This is the unseen consequence of their suffering, isolation in plain sight. And here lies the most insidious danger. When no one truly sees them, they begin to believe they were never meant to be seen at all. They fade, they withdraw. Some turn to escapism, drifting through life in a haze, numbing themselves with distractions, relationships that cannot hold them, addictions that prompt. Imagine standing at the edge of the ocean again. But this time, something is different. The waves no longer pull you under. The tide no longer dictates your movement. Instead of dissolving into the water, you step back. For the first time, you realize you were never meant to drown. You were meant to sail. For too long, Pisces has mistaken suffering for fate. They have accepted their role as the silent observer, the self-sacrificing giver, the dreamer lost between worlds. But what if the real tragedy was not their pain, but the lie that they must endure it alone? The time has come for rebellion, not against the world, but against the unconscious patterns that have kept them trapped. And the first act of rebellion is the most radical of all, choosing oneself. Pisces has spent a lifetime dissolving into others. Their identity is often built around how much they can give, how deeply they can feel, how much they can understand. But this endless outpouring has a cost. A life lived solely for others eventually becomes a life unlived. And so the first step to freedom is terrifying in its simplicity. To stop asking, "Who needs me?" and start asking, "Who am I?" This is not selfishness, this is survival. For too long, Pisces has believed that love means sacrifice, that to be kind is to endure, that to be strong is to carry burdens in silence. But this is a distortion, a lesson learned through pain, not truth. Love is not meant to be a slow erasure of the self. Empathy is not meant to be a prison. And so, the second act of rebellion is this: setting boundaries. It feels unnatural at first. Saying no when every instinct screams to say yes. Stepping back when every impulse demands leaning in. Letting others carry their own pain instead of taking it on like a silent martyr. But this is where Pisces must understand. A boundary is not a rejection. It is a declaration of existence. Pisces was never meant to be a ghost. They were meant to be a presence. And presence requires space. It requires the audacity to take up room in the world, to demand reciprocity, to recognize that love is not just about giving, It is about receiving, too. But even deeper than boundaries, there is one final rebellion. One that will shake the very core of who they believe themselves to be. The rejection of suffering as an identity. For too long, Pisces has mistaken pain for depth. They have seen their sorrow as proof of their wisdom, their heartbreak as evidence of their capacity to love. But pain is not a virtue. Suffering does not make one holy. There is wisdom in sorrow, yes, but there is also wisdom in joy, in creation, in the simple act of being alive without carrying the weight of the world. And so, the last act of rebellion is not just to survive, but to thrive. To laugh without guilt, to love without fear, to exist without apology. Pisces is not meant to be lost at sea. They are meant to rise, not in spite of their depth, but because of it. And once they do, they will see what they were always meant to see. The final, most powerful realization. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you thought you knew about yourself was wrong. The sorrow, the sacrifice, the unbearable depth you carried, it was never a curse. It was never proof that you were destined to suffer. The world had told you that your softness made you weak, that your emotions were a burden, that your ability to feel was something to control, suppress, or apologize for. But the truth is this: your depth was never the problem. The problem was believing that the world would drown you for having it. Pisces is not here to dissolve. They are here to transform. For so long, their wisdom felt like a weight, like knowledge that could only lead to suffering. But wisdom is not meant to be a prison. It is meant to be a bridge, a way forward, a way out. And the way out is this: to stop waiting for the world to understand them and to start understanding themselves. Pisces' tragedy was never that they felt too much. It was that they believed no one else did, that they were alone in their depth, that no one could possibly see the world the way they do. But the truth is, the world is full of others who feel the same, who are just as lost, just as deep, just as afraid to be seen. And when Pisces realizes this, something shifts. They are no longer the silent observer, the self-sacrificing dreamer, the ghost in the background. They become something else entirely: a guide, a creator, a force. Because what is a healer who finally heals themselves? What is a dreamer who stops escaping and starts building? What is a soul who no longer drowns in their own depth, but learns to swim? A Pisces who has freed themselves is unstoppable. They no longer wait for love, they become it. They no longer absorb the world's pain without question. They choose where to place their energy. They no longer fade into the background. They step forward, fully, completely, without apology. And perhaps the greatest truth of all is this: Pisces was never meant to suffer. They were meant to show the world another way to live, not through pain, but through presence, through love, through the quiet, undeniable power of someone who has seen the depths of existence and chooses to rise anyway. The ocean was never meant to consume them. It was meant to carry them home.